Well, good evening, everybody. We had a robust closed session, so thank you for your waiting. I'll go ahead and kick off the Pledge of Allegiance. And before I do that, state that all of the council members are here in person. Please join me if you are able.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. And City Attorney, can we please have a report out on closed session?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The council did meet in closed session on 2 items of real property negotiations, properties negotiators and properties as noted on the written agenda. There was no reportable action taken, simply direction to staff on price and terms of negotiation.
Thank you. So before we get started on our public comment, before our public comment, we will have the City Manager with a report out on what's going on right now.
Thank you very much. We have a few slides to highlight a few items that are in the works right now. First up, we want to make sure everybody is aware that we're in the process of recruiting for our advisory bodies. So of course, our mayor and city council are encouraging everyone's participation by serving on one of our advisory bodies. These are groups of volunteers who are appointed by our city council who advise staff and our council on matters that affect policy and issues that will affect the future of our community. The annual advisory body recruitment process just opened yesterday, and the city will accept applications all the way through Sunday, January 26th. As you can see on the screen, we currently are recruiting to fill 30 different positions across 16 advisory bodies. That's a lot of opportunities for a lot of folks to get engaged and get involved and help us make decisions. At the close of the application period, council subcommittee members will conduct interviews with selected applicants, and then the full city council will consider approving the appointments at their meeting held on April 1st, and then the terms of the newly appointed members will begin immediately. So please take a look at our website for more information and consider starting your application. So if any questions come up, certainly reach out to our city clerk and our office here, and we'll be able to answer those for everyone. Next up, I'm actually going to ask Luke Schwartz, our transportation manager, to come up and provide a little bit of an update and an overview of where we're at with our Vision Zero action plan.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Whitney. Madam Mayor, council members, Luke Schwartz, transportation manager with our Public Works Department. Want to give a brief update on something our staff's been working very hard on. We're preparing to release a review draft of our first Vision Zero action plan. It's essentially the evolution of our ongoing traffic safety program. It's a more robust, detailed analysis of not just focusing on reducing collisions overall, but really the most severe types of collisions that we've had huge issues with. We're in the midst of a public safety crisis, honestly, and slow. 21 people in our city have been killed in traffic since 2019. For comparison, we've had 3 homicides in that same time frame. We're seeing similar trends throughout the country and other places. We're not unique, but it's a problem, and it's something that we're focused on addressing. The plan looks at both kind of focused recommendations for areas where we know there's a history of problems, as well as more systematic strategies to improve safety throughout the city so we reduce the problem from happening before something tragic happens. It includes recommendations for both engineering strategies as well as enforcement, education, and some potential advocacy topics for things like vehicle safety and things that are maybe outside of the control of the city. We have a couple of key findings I think are important to hit on that you'll see in the review draft is, as I mentioned, we've had 21 people killed in the last 5.5 years, which is terrible. 3 out of 4 of those fatal and severe collisions are happening on just 10% of our road miles. So it's happening on a very focused number of streets for the most part. They're generally fast traffic, multi-lane arterial streets with not a lot of crossings for people on foot or on bike. 3 out of 4 of those people killed or severely injured are traveling on foot or on bike. And about 1 in 5 are parts of our unhoused community, which represents about 1% of our population, but is represented about 20-fold in our fatal and severe injury collision trends. A lot more information coming out. We plan to release the draft plan for public review in about 2.5 weeks. It'll be presented to the Active Transportation Committee on December 12th. Posted on our traffic safety webpage, inviting input from the community through the middle of January, with plans to incorporate any comments and bring back a final plan to the City Council on March 18th. So if you're interested, please review the report when it comes out. We're really saddened but excited to make progress on some of these trends. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, and of course, we'll take questions when we wrap up with the report. We just have a few more slides to go over some events that are occurring or just updates on where we're at with some of our holiday activities. So our holiday trolley is going to be back on the street and in action. It'll run from November 29th through December 29th on Thursdays from 5 to 9 p.m., as well as on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 12 to 8 p.m. We have prepared 500 bilingual postcards, and they'll be distributed to the Visitor Center, downtown SLO, and as well as hotels and restaurants along the trolley route. So keep an eye out for the holiday trolley. Next, we wanted to make sure everybody's aware as well that we are headed back into our holiday parking promotion season. So folks can enjoy garage parking for free on select holidays. As established by council resolution, the city will again be offering free garage parking in all 3 garages on select days, including Thanksgiving Day and weekend, every Sunday in December, Christmas, New Year's Eve, and New Year's Days. All parking will also be free on the night of the holiday parade on December 6th. And on street in the garages, all city parking areas will not be charging for parking that day from 5 p.m. to midnight, as we encourage everyone to attend the parade that evening. And then the last couple of items, we just want to give people a preview of what's coming up in our next couple of council meetings. December 9th will be a sad, happy day, I think, as we both recognize our outgoing council member and Vice Mayor Andy Pease, and then welcome our new council member and administer the oath of office, and then select a vice mayor on that day, as well as certify the election results. Again, that's December 9th, which is a Monday. The following day, on December 10th, we have quite a few items, so we're going to be putting our new council member to work immediately with a lot of discussions. Really want to highlight here, we currently are intending to publish a notice of intent to essentially reestablish our solid waste recycling and organics franchise agreement with our waste hauler. It will set out some new terms for our contract, as well as explain a little bit in terms of the rate changes that will affect. There will be a rate process that we go through. We follow a Prop 218 process. Notices would come out after that point with a hearing that we're scheduling for January 21st. So just want to make sure folks are aware this will be the first time that this issue will be presented. At least this is our first step. We're required to provide notice of intent that we're going to continue that relationship with our current waste hauler. And then also wanted to highlight, we will be talking about our upcoming budget process and setting the stage for the upcoming number of items to discuss our budget, and as well as presenting our first quarter budget report from this fiscal year. We will be discussing initiating a general plan and specific plan amendment process for the San Luis Ranch Lot 7 to allow for residential uses on that property. And then finally, we're proposing to finalize a lease agreement with SLO Rep. So those are the main items coming up on December 10th. So with that, that concludes the city manager report. And then again, we're happy to answer questions.
Thank you. That was a great amount of information, especially this slide right here, December 10th. I appreciate that you put that out here, because more and more people are busy with the holidays and winter and don't really think about what's happening. And similar to today's public hearing topic, there's just so much information that we're constantly working on. So thank you very much. Any questions for the city manager or for Luke? briefly, I'm sorry if I missed it, about when will it be posted, the report?
We post the agenda packet for the Active Transportation Committee a week ahead of time, so their meeting's on the 12th. We'll try to be getting it out that Thursday afternoon before that and posting it on the city website and tying that with a push via our social media channels to make sure everyone knows it's out there, as well as some follow-ups once it's posted so folks that maybe can't attend the meeting still have a chance to take a look and provide feedback.
Perfect, thank you. Councilmember Shorsman.
Yep, just one more question while you're there. You mentioned that the plan would come before the Active Transportation Committee, but I didn't catch the date of that. Can you give me the details on that again?
Sure, December 12th. It's 2.5 weeks from now. So, yeah.
And the meetings are at 6 o'clock here?
6 o'clock Thursday in the room next door, unless we get a lot of comments, and then we'll shift it over into the main room.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next up is public comment for items not on the agenda. So if you have items for public comment, if you have turned in a slip of paper, it looks like that, yellow slip to the city clerk, this is that moment. Also, if you still wish to turn in a public comment slip, now is that moment. City clerk?
We have two, and the first one is Shelby West, and then Andrea McGee.
Great. And then I just before, as you're coming up, that's totally fine. I just wanted to highlight sometimes as we have new people coming to meetings, it might not always be clear because it's a very awkward moment. We stand here, we sit here and we listen and we say thank you. And we don't often engage very much with the public comment. So I just wanted to let you know that we are hearing you. And if there's something immediately to respond to the person, we'll probably have a staff person come see you. Otherwise, we will chat with you after. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Madam Mayor and council members, I'm Shelby West, and I'm a resident of San Luis Obispo City, a mother of a San Luis Coastal student, and a teacher in Lucia Mar, and I'm here representing the Early Care and Education Planning Council's Advocacy Committee, a group committed to building and furthering important work of We Are the Care initiative, a multi-sector coalition mobilized to get individuals and agencies to pursue collective ways to address the child care crisis. And as you know, since We Are the Care last gave comment, much progress has been made to lift up child care in our county and to find solutions for working families due to the ever-present child care crisis. $3 million in county ARPA funds allocated to childcare are being dispersed to local providers. This has allowed the field a bit of relief from the extra strain of COVID-19 in the form of competitive and non-competitive grants. Another significant accomplishment is the continuation of the collaborative childcare study among 4 of our county's public agencies, Cal Poly, San Luis Coastal Unified, the County of San Luis Obispo, and you, the City of San Luis Obispo. The study's goal is to examine and implement viable options toward a vision that all residents and public employees in our communities have access to quality, affordable childcare. So together, your city and the other agencies are estimated to represent around 10% of our county's entire workforce. So this focus on childcare has been an immense support and example to others in the community. We would also like to specifically thank the City of San Luis Obispo for its continued focus on childcare. Examples include the child care study referenced previously, the city's child care startup and expansion grant program, the inclusion of child care in the city's economic development strategic plan, and the commitment to streamlining the permitting process. The people of San Luis Obispo rely on their civic leaders to facilitate change, and the City of SLO is continually prioritizing children and families and the child care infrastructure. We were excited to see that the city has also submitted a letter of intent to the Uplift Coalition for the Child Care Grant and Fee Waiver Program, another opportunity for the City of San Luis Obispo to pave the way for an improved child care system. The City of SLO has become a model and leader for other cities and public entities and how to truly be a champion for working families and childcare. We look forward to a continued solution-building partnership with you all. Finally, we wanted to let you know that the Early Care and Education Planning Council will be hosting a council retreat from 9 to 3 on Friday, January 31st, and it will focus on collective impact, and as our civic leaders, you are critical to this work, so more information and a formal invitation to follow. Thank you. We'll see you in the new year.
Thank you so much.
Andrea McGee.
Hi there. My name is Andrea McGee, and I had a little speech prepared, but my phone died, so this might be better anyways, just to talk to you like people. So I'm here. I'm a local mom of 2 teenagers who go to SLO High. I'm a swim coach for San Luis Obispo Water Polo Club, and also the coach for Los Tigritos program that teaches underprivileged kids how to swim. I sincerely enjoy water and very enthusiastic about aquatics. At 15, I started swimming and playing water polo, and that's where I learned discipline and endurance that you need in order to have those things. And I feel like those character traits really served me well as an adult and as I was growing up. My goal in life and my big push is to share this with as many people as possible. And I found that there's a real need in our community and in our county for swim lessons. So what some of us have started doing is teaching swim lessons to those kids who are just can't afford them or it's not a part of their culture. So this summer, San Luis Obispo Water Polo Club we basically got together and taught 50 kids how to swim between ages 6 and 14. 50 kids in the water, and it was amazing. Not only did we get to teach 50 kids how to swim, we just taught 10 kids how to swim who were going off to Catalina. And of course, we only had 2 days to teach them, but 10 kids were super scared of the water at the beginning of those 2 days. And at the end, they were learning how to float and then could participate in so many more things that they could do with the school on their 5th grade trip to Catalina. So with that being said, we have a real push and we have people, humans in this community who are trying to get these programs going. The real hurdle that we have, of course, is pool space. And pools are not cheap and they're pretty expensive actually, and pool time is very rare, but we feel like this is a really important thing because the human life is more rare than that. So we're basically here to let you know that this program is happening and many other programs that I'm working with other aquatics people with, and I hope that we can, start a relationship so that we can try to push these kind of values, these kind of goals through. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to point out this gentleman in the back row here who's waving his hand in the gray blazer. That's the Director of Parks and Rec, and I hope that you get to know him and his team. That's great work that you're doing. Thank you. Any other speakers?
Not on this item.
Okay, great. So we'll move forward to the consent agenda. And this is, in theory, things that are not controversial. So I want to see if my colleagues have any items that you wish to pull or have anything about. Vice Mayor Pease.
I'd like to pull 6B for discussion.
Great, thank you. All right, since it's only 6A and 6B today, can we just hold the whole consent agenda so we can just talk about that and then we'll approve everything together. Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you. I am in support. The question that I have is the total budget available, the $150,000. I know that by the time we get to the point where we're doing the awarding, that we sometimes feel that that $150,000 is being spread thin because there is so much need. And so I'm checking to see if there is, I know that's what's in the budget and we could just, y'all can adjust it for next time, but I'm wondering if it's, if there would be interest in considering an increase to that budget to, 175, 200,000 out of anticipated mid-year budget opportunities. I haven't checked in with staff to see what's even available, but I wanted to see if there was interest in considering, and maybe it's dependent on what applications come in.
Councilmember Shorsman.
I just would love it. I don't know if anybody's ready to do this, but if staff could remind us what the pattern of the funding for these grants have been. Is this the standard amount that we always do? I believe there was one point in time where we raised it on a one-time basis, but is 150,000 usually what we've done?
That was because we weren't able to spend it that one year. But yeah, Deputy City Manager Greg.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Yeah, $150,000 is a typical amount of money that we have for these grants. There are other grant funding opportunities, as mentioned previously. On December 10th, we'll have our DEI High Impact Grant funding. There can be some overlap sometimes between the two different grant opportunities, but yes, $150,000 for this one.
Thank you. I thought so, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Just initially, I would love to give more. I think it's hard without any other data to say where are we going to pull that from. I know in February-ish we usually have the numbers of what our mid-year looks like. So at that point in time, we'd have the money to be able to say yes, no, more or less. My question, I think, City Manager, would be, if we have the desire and intent for hopeful, if there's extra in February, to direct staff, but not necessarily require at this moment, since we don't know what kind of money will be, what the budget would be available, right? What would that look like?
Thank you. I think you've got a couple of options if there is an interest in increasing the amount available for the program as a whole. We are scheduled to consider the mid-year budget on February 18th, which is a typical time frame. You did receive the year-end report about a month ago that explained where we think we ended based on unaudited financials. Certainly, you know, an additional $25,000 is available from year-end reserves, essentially. We were planning on coming forward on February 18th with a list of recommended kind of allocations for that funding, largely based on, you know, either reserves or, say, additional CalPERS payments and things like that that are sort of larger ticket items that are based on our existing policy. So we do have a policy that generally governs use of year-end monies. So you could look at making that adjustment now. It would certainly help with the grant review and allocation process. The more they know now, the easier it'll be when they review the grants. I guess my only caution would be, you know, is this a one-time change, or what are the bigger, longer-term picture kind of considerations with making the adjustment and at this particular time? So I think you could go ahead and do that now. You would just essentially appropriate it from the fund balance, or we could look at doing that on February 18th, but depending on where we're at with the review process, I don't know if it would require some additional consideration by the review committee and just making sure everybody's aware of how much funding is available.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yeah, I support the idea, excuse me, of raising the dollar amount, but I'd like to wait till February 18th and fold it into a more a considered and longer range kind of analysis, so that it wouldn't be just a one-off, but it would be a question of how we want to go forward in the future. So,
thank you, Councilmember Shorsman.
That's essentially what I was going to say. I'm not really interested right now, I don't think, in making a change, because we don't know what's in front of us. And I will also just note that the amount's never going to be enough. The community is pretty aware of how much we've done in the past historically, so those organizations that are going to apply for this kind of
know generally what the pot is going to be? Would we be able to do maybe 1 or 2 more grants, or maybe, increase the amount that 1 or 2 more grants receives? It's worth talking about in February, but the more we have, the more grant applications and asks we will get. So just want to make sure we are aware of that and know that we're never going to be able to fund the whole pot like I'm sure we would like to.
Thank you. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to raise the amount tonight, but I'm going to second the sentiment of Councilmember Marks and just say that I need to make this decision with a little bit more data in front of me. So I will hold off until February.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Pease.
Thanks all for the consideration. I appreciate that, and I think that's a sensible approach. I would imagine that perhaps when staff does come back in February, that even just, I think it's been $150,000 for a long time. So even just to kind of keep up with the, inflation, cost of living, et cetera, would be an appropriate consideration. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councilmember Marks.
I'd like to, if we're through discussing, I'd like to move approval of the consent agenda.
All right, I'm going to do public comment first, and then we'll come back to that. That's okay. Do we have public comment?
We have none.
Okay, now we can go ahead and you can move.
Okay, I would like to move approval of the consent agenda.
Do you have any additional thoughts with that, or is that it?
With the understanding that on February 18th, we will council will look at the possibility of changing the dollar amount of the grant on an ongoing basis.
Great, thank you. Vice Mayor Pease.
I'll second.
Thank you, and I appreciate the conversation, and City Manager, I look forward to that being part of the conversation in February too. City Clerk, roll call, please.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pease?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Schwarzman?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, and that passes 5-0. Thank you for the conversation, and we'll move forward to the public hearing, our business item. And today we have in front of us 7A, to consider recommendation to approve pre-litigation settlement of California Voting Rights Act district election demand. And I believe we will have the city attorney start us off on this conversation, just for the audience to know that we'll have questions from the council, and then we will have public comments and then come back for deliberation. City attorney.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I am very glad to be in front of you with this item at long last. I do really want to begin just with some thanks before we get into the presentation proper. Thanks to you. This has been a lot. I had Kelly count how many closed sessions we've had since the original demand, and it's been 13. And this is a very dense landscape that's been a lot of information and a lot of analysis for you all to digest. And I really appreciate both the diligence and the support in you doing that. Also, extraordinary thanks to our city clerk, Teresa, our elections guide, and our DEI staff, Nestor and Matthew, and Greg in his supervisory role as well. I also really want to acknowledge our Latina leaders that really tuned in with us very early on here, and asked great questions and provided incredibly invaluable insight into the perspectives they were hearing from their represented constituencies here locally regarding equity concerns and considerations arising from the SIVR demand served on the city. Just really thoughtful input, and we have one of those representatives here with us tonight, Chelsea, so I just want to say thank you there. I also could not have supported and advised the council at all without the support of our outside specialized counsel, Marguerite Leone, and she is available remotely this evening. but has worked tirelessly to educate me and help me to provide that support to you and just provide expert guidance through the whole complicated legal landscape. I am, by definition, a generalist, and this was an area in which we certainly needed some specialized support and felt very, very well supported. And she will be available she'll weigh in a little bit through the presentation, and then also will be available to answer questions.
And City Attorney, I do see Marguerite, so just so we know that she is there and available.
Hello, Marguerite. Welcome. Thank you. I also want to introduce Kevin Shankman, who is the legal counsel for the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, which I will hereinafter refer to as SV Rep because I cannot get that mouthful out every time. Mr. Shankman is right here in person with us. SV Rep's a nonpartisan organization dedicated to the empowerment of the Latino community towards civic and voter engagement, and Kevin has represented that group for a long time in a lot of these actions. I want to thank Mr. Shankman for his forthright and open communication and willingness to engage in those conversations with us in this process, and also the really active collaboration and working with us to reach what we believe is going to be a really effective and collectively beneficial settlement proposal. As I am sure you are aware, and I am certainly aware as a city attorney in a city attorney community, the path following a SIVRA demand can be, and in other communities certainly has been, a quite contentious and divisive process. We're really grateful that we've been able to work together as effectively and collaboratively as we have to avoid litigation, and also propose what we sincerely believe will be a very positive step forward that aligns with the shared voter and candidate equity goals that I think are common to the city, to SV Rep, and certainly are at the heart of the purpose and intent of SIVRA. He's traveled from Southern California to be here with us. I will ask him to step in and share his client's perspective along the path of our presentation. And he's obviously available here to answer the council's questions as well. I don't want to misstate his client's position, so I appreciate you being able to hear that directly. And with that, we'll dive in. The mayor has, there we go, has already foreshadowed our recommendation here, but that is to approve a settlement agreement, and the settlement agreement includes a draft complaint to be filed, and that is a lawsuit. That's another word for a lawsuit, to be filed by SV Rep alleging SIVRA violations, a draft answer from the city to that complaint, which will deny the allegations that the city has violated SIVRA, and a stipulated judgment that's been negotiated between the parties directing the transition to citywide single vote council elections beginning in November 2026. And so the purpose of that is to obtain court oversight and ongoing jurisdiction in order to manage the implementation of the settlement agreement. Obviously, the 2026 implementation date gives us a significant amount of time to engage in public outreach and education about the implementation should the council choose to go forward with the settlement agreement. The remainder of the recommendation is to authorize the mayor, myself, and the city manager to execute and file the documents and take the administrative steps necessary to implement the settlement agreement, and then to appropriate $75,000 from fiscal year 23-24 general fund to be used towards to satisfy the attorney's fees payment that is part of the settlement agreement. So in the way of background, just for the benefit of the public, I feel like we have been so deep in this that it feels sort of like a broken record. I do want to acknowledge some of the feedback that we've heard from the public correspondence, that this feels like a surprise, that this feels unlike the normal level of public outreach and engagement that we are accustomed to here in San Luis Obispo. And I want to acknowledge that that is true, and we understand the frustration that's being expressed regarding that. The reality is this was a litigation settlement context, and there were necessarily conversations that had to be agreed upon between parties to a potential litigation that did not lend themselves to that broad public outreach. I do appreciate the direction from the council to be here tonight, and I hope that the community will feel better informed and hopefully understand the path that you've traveled, the tough decisions you had to make. The decision before you when you get a SIVRA demand is you go to district elections, you fight, which can be millions of dollars, even if you ultimately prove to be right. Or you negotiate a settlement. We chose that third path. We did that, I believe, very comprehensively and constructively, and I am very proud of the recommendation that we're bringing forward to you because I truly believe it's in the best interest of our community and advances your goals as your constituencies elected you to set. So SIVRA was enacted in 2002 for the purpose of remediating any California at-large electoral systems that had the effect of diluting minority voting power because of racially polarized results. It was intended to increase opportunity of protected class voters to elect their chosen candidates or at least to influence the outcome of elections. And so its purpose really is remediation of those racial and ethnic disparities in our voting system, and in particular, as alleged here, as it relates to our Latine population. SIVRA does not specify what the remedy to an alleged violation must be. Single-member districts are a common remedy, but they're not mandated. However, SIVRA requires notice of an alleged violation, so we...
City Attorney, can I ask you one thing?
Sure.
Can you share with the community what Latine is?
I'm sorry.
Can you share the definition?
The Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, there are a number of preferred iterations of that. I've been informed by the folks that I've been talking to that the preferred iteration is Latine. So.
Perfect, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. And the city manager reminds me that I am not doing my tech job well, which Teresa knew I wasn't going to do, and she's she's looking at me cross-eyed right now. Yeah. So SIVRA requires notice of an alleged violation, often referred to as a demand letter, to be provided to a public agency, and it provides an opportunity for a public agency to adopt an election alternative to address an alleged SIVRA violation before a lawsuit can be filed. So also commonly referred to as a safe harbor period of time. So it gives you about 90 days to, depending on sequencing a little bit, to consider whether you agree that there is sufficient evidence of vote dilution and whether that vote dilution can be appropriately remedied by moving to district elections. If that is your choice, there is a safe harbor afforded under the Elections Code that protects you from lawsuit and limits the amount of attorney's fees that can be recovered against you. And so the path that got us here is in 2019, we've received 2 notices of SIVRA violations. One in 2019 from an individual voter who alleged a SIVRA violation. We negotiated a settlement of that, which did not involve any change to the electoral system, largely based on the efforts, the DEI efforts, and other equity investments that the council was on the path to making at that time. A second notice was received from Mr. Shankman on behalf of SV Rep in 2023. And SV Rep was very clear from the outset that it was focused on achieving structural change. So that was a precedent to us having any sort of constructive conversation about a settlement path, an alternative to litigation or district elections. Both notices included a demand that the city transition to district elections. And both notices have been available for public review on the website in association with, as I mentioned, those 13 closed sessions that we've had. And that is, in fact, the basis of the conversations that we've had with many of our Latina leaders was their review of the letters and questions and conversations that emerged thereafter. Mine's not working. I'm going to give it to you. And so just walking through a little bit the steps that the city took, I'm focusing after both notices, but I'm going to focus going forward primarily on the response to the current letter. So after the 2019, we retained an elections expert and demographer. That was Marguerite, and the demographer that she typically works with in her extensive experience in this arena. We conducted demographic analyses as a basis to evaluate whether we believed that there was potential merit to the demand, and also to understand whether district elections would be an effective remedy if, in fact, we found that there was evidence of voter dilution. Our analysis suggested there was not, and so we brought that information, that analysis to the council in closed session, again with the public notices, and we requested to meet with Mr. Shankman and SV Rep to discuss, an overview of what we believed the data was showing and where the analysis was pointing, and find out if there was an opportunity to explore an alternative pathway. And then also began outreach to some of our Latina leaders and certainly our DEI staff to understand whether, there was a unrecognized need or, sort of wave of support behind district elections in our community. That is not, in fact, what we heard from our Latina leaders, and so we proceeded down the path. Mr. Shankman did agree to meet with us. And that was the beginning of a pretty constructive series of conversations that have led us here. Kevin, I don't know if at this point you'd like to come up and share a little bit about SV Rep's path forward, or I'm doing fine so far. So at this point, then I will turn it over briefly to Marguerite and just have her talk a little bit, share a little bit about San Luis Obispo's demographics and how that's relevant to the analysis here, and why that led us kind of to the next steps that we've taken so far. So Marguerite, can I ask you to weigh in? I think you're muted.
There we go. Well, good. Thank you very much, Christine, for introducing me and the kind words that you did say. The city's demographics are maybe even central to the decisions or the recommendations or the studies, all of them, that we have done in response to the CVRA demands. The city's a small city. It's a college town, but it's a very small city. And it hovers around 50,000, a little bit less. It doesn't change much over the years. The city's Latina population is not insignificant. It's generally, last time I looked, around 14%. This is the group of eligible voters, children, others that are here in the city, a somewhat larger group, but the California Voting Rights Act looks at voters. So that group is about 14% in the city. What we discovered in doing our studies and diving into the demographics of the city is the San Luis Obispo is unusual but not uncommon for California small cities, where the protected class population, in this case the Latine, are fairly well dispersed throughout the city. We did due diligence in looking at those concentrations and came up with the conclusions not dissimilar to what was presented to us by Mr. Shankman. I'll let him address that himself. That given the dispersion throughout the city, the strongest voter district that we could make was in the range of 20% Latine eligible voters. That means that 80%, now we're presuming racially polarized voting, we're presuming it, not admitting it, but presuming it. That means that the 80%, even in a district, will consistently outvote the Latino populace there, even if that population is very cohesive in their voting patterns. So we didn't see an obvious remedy there or an obvious enhancement for the Latine community to bring them more fully, more robustly into the electoral process. But we also saw potential downsides, including with a dispersed population, artificially limiting the candidate pool, not getting the results that we want, arguably stifling competition. And whereas the Latine population now has influence throughout the city, this would restrict that primarily to a single district. So those are some of the demographic considerations that advanced our conversation from the usual remedy in these cases, which is the single member districts. And I need to thank Mr. Shankman for his generosity. He did share with us, and it's not often that this happens, what SVREP had in mind for the city. And this is, and Kevin, with all due regard, this is his work of art. And it does create in the south part of the city, the Green District, an area with a somewhat, not significantly, but somewhat higher Latine population than citywide. But there's also a second area in the blue, which is comparable, however, cannot be included in the Southern District because of population requirements. So what a single member district plan does in San Luis Obispo is actually split the Latine voting block. Assuming there is one, this plan will split it because of equal population requirements. And then the result of trying to gather and make an effective district is that you see that it reaches out in ways that perhaps don't recognize the city's communities to gather in population that could help bolster and enhance Latine political power in the southwestern part of the city. But you end up with districts that split up the communities and don't look like anything that residents of your city would recognize as appropriate vehicles for representation. So having worked generously and closely with SVREP on these demographic realities and working actually from a map, these were not hypotheticals. Obviously, we did our own map, but the map that counts right now is the map that's being proposed in litigation. So we moved from this map in an information sharing mode that resulted in some creative thinking about other potential remedies. Now, as the city attorney mentioned, the CVRA does not mandate a remedy. It calls for appropriate remedies. I would love to say that the city of San Luis Obispo is the first to move away from single member districts, but there is one other community that is trying a different approach as well. And this one seems to be well suited to the goals in San Luis Obispo. And that is a simplified form of proportional representation, which would be a citywide single vote system. And I don't want to jump the gun, City Attorney, but we can discuss alternatives later on in your presentation.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. That's really helpful. I do just want to note, because I've had a couple of questions regarding the map. One is, well, if we were to go to districts, would it necessarily be a 5-district plan like the one depicted here? The answer is not necessarily. There is nothing in the settlement agreement that, the settlement agreement does preserve the council's right to transition to districts at any time. If the demographics change, if any of the data suggests that that is an appropriate next step forward to address or remediate what you view the data showing a SIVRA violation or a dilution problem. So you can do that at any time. There's nothing that takes that option off the table, nor is there anything that ties you to this particular map. The purpose of this map is a comparator to the proposal that we are recommending that you move forward with, the citywide single vote, to be able to see in the highest percentage Latine district that we can currently construct what the comparative election results would have looked like. And so that's how we'll sort of evaluate this as we go along. But there's nothing that ties us to this specific map in the event that the council later decides that it wants to explore districting, because that seems like an appropriate remedy in response to changing data. So with this background and following the meeting with Mr. Shankman, I think we arrived at the conclusion that we had some shared objectives, and I think that's largely because of the leadership of this council and councils that preceded you in moving our community forward, and the really diligent work of our community in partnering with the city to do some kind of creative things to invest in DEI and truly inclusion and equity in our community. So we were focused on enhanced voter equity and diverse candidate participation in local elections, data-based discussions and proposals, and again, including some exchange of data that doesn't always happen early in these sort of contentious relationships. Regarding the most effective means to advance the purpose of SIVRA. So I think we all have to, there's been a lot of input from the community about neighborhood representation. And I think for this purpose, it's really important for us to remind ourselves that that is not the purpose of SIVRA. SIVRA is about voter racial inequities and remedying those dilution issues that plague a lot of electoral systems. We agreed on an openness to consider viable alternatives to district elections that could more effectively advance SIVRA objectives in SLO. We focused on solutions that align with and advance both SV Rep's voter empowerment goals and the city's diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. We talked a lot about avoidance of solutions with unintended consequences that could adversely impact city progress toward DEI objectives. And in particular, in our discussions with our Latine leaders groups, those concerns were expressed pretty consistently and pretty unanimously, that there was a lot of momentum building in the community, and that there is a lot of community coalition building happening among our traditionally underrepresented groups, and that this kind of splitting up of the community for representational purposes could really adversely impact that progress. And then also enhanced voter education, outreach, and engagement, which I think is an ongoing goal of the city and certainly part of our DEI programs and work programs and goals. And then SV Rep's primary objective, as I said from the beginning, was to achieve a structural change. And so that really was a precondition to a willingness to engage in a settlement negotiation other than for districts. So I do want to keep that in mind, because I've also been asked the question, can't we just keep things how they are? And so the answer is, if we wish to proceed with a settlement with SV Rep, my understanding is the answer is no. And Mr. Shankman can correct me if I've misstated that in any way. So moving on then to the proposed settlement terms. And this is going on, we started negotiations very shortly after service of the letter, so we're going to be creeping up on a couple of years here in a minute. The proposal is to transition to citywide single vote electoral system again in 2026 and thereafter, in which each voter votes for their preferred candidate among all candidates running. So it's a vote for one to elect two. Each voter votes for their top candidate, and the top two vote getters win. We have agreed to commitments to education and outreach to enhance that diverse candidate development and voter education and participation. We have agreed to data sharing to track the effectiveness of the new system as compared to SV Rep's Exhibit D, the demonstration map. The city, as I said, it can implement district elections at any time, and then the obligations regarding obviously subsequent review of elections we're relieved of those future obligations in the event that the council does decide at some point that it wants to transition to district elections. The agreement provides for the transition to district elections if data analyses following the 2026 and 2028 election cycles doesn't demonstrate the effectiveness of the new system as compared to the district map. So in other words, if the data suggests that there was a Latina preferred candidate, that candidate lost to a majority white preferred candidate, and that Latina preferred candidate would have won in the demonstration district, after those two election cycles, then there is a process by which we would bring it forward to council to recommend consideration of transitioning to district elections. In the event that all of the data supported that move, and at that time we had a council who was not interested in proceeding down that path, notwithstanding the data, there is an expedited litigation path available to SV Rep to proceed to force district elections in the event that the council didn't want to do that voluntarily. There is a payment of SV Rep's attorney's fees of $75,000 for its costs of participation to date in negotiations with the city to avoid litigation. I will tell you that Mr. Shankman does a lot of this work, and I don't personally know what his hourly rate is, but I suspect that it is well above what we're accustomed to here on the Central Coast. And then there's a limitation on costs and plaintiff's attorney's fees to be borne by the city related to agreed upon dispute resolution processes. And those processes would kick in if, following the 2026 and 2028 election cycle analysis, if we, for instance, cannot agree whether the data shows that there is a Latina preferred candidate. And then there is a referee process whereby we both present our best arguments to a referee. There's a recommendation. That referee's recommendation ultimately goes back to the court that has jurisdiction over the stipulated judgment. And then there is, if we're not resolved, there is no cap on litigation fees should we take the expedited litigation path rather than this other pathway. Because again, the referee process is only if we disagree on the data. If we agree on what the data shows and the council simply rejects the commitment to go to district elections, is when the expedited litigation path kicks in. And so we talked a little, just very briefly, about what is citywide single vote. It's a form of voting that is also known as limited voting or bullet voting sometimes. And in effect, it's pretty straightforward. It would maintain the basic structure of our election system, whereby 2 council members and the mayor are up for election every 2 years, with council members being elected to 4-year terms, the mayor being elected to a 2-year term. It doesn't affect term limits or anything like that. It doesn't make any changes in that regard. It simply has voters voting. Rather than voting for 2 candidates to elect 2 candidates, it has voters voting for 1 candidate to elect 2 candidates, with the top 2 vote getters taking the seat. It doesn't place any geographic barriers to selecting a candidate of choice, so it preserves that citywide coalition building capacity that we have heard from our community locally. Is very much in play and is not desirable to disrupt. We have learned through some anecdotal information shared with council members, which I'm sure you'll share more with the community, that a significant percentage of our community apparently has been voting this way. And so this essentially makes that the level playing field for everyone, the single vote alternative. So it is a current practice among certain groups in the city. And then it prevents the same majority from controlling all of the available seats, and thereby enhances the ability of a minority population to elect their preferred candidate, or at a minimum influence or block the election of a non-preferred candidate in some cases. And Marguerite, I'm going to turn this over to you because this is a chart. You may have seen agenda correspondence come in from Professor Michael Latner, professor of poli-sci at Cal Poly, and he provided his perspective on the staff report and the path being recommended going forward, and gave this example chart, which I think is sort of helpful to visualize what we're talking about. But I'll have Marguerite explain the why behind why it works this way.
Right. Just a little bit of background on the single vote too. It was interesting to discover that it comes naturally to a large percentage of San Luis Obispo's population. But historically, in the voting rights field, one of the major tools used in the South to prevent the election of minorities was to ban single voting. In the case law, it's called bullet voting or single shop voting. And in old and maybe not so old discriminatory times, those sorts of tools available to minority voters were banned so that they would not have the type of power or influence that comes from cohesive selection of a candidate and then targeted voting for that candidate. Because under those circumstances, what could happen, and I must thank Professor Latner for doing this immensely, because it's helpful. As in the second row down, candidate votes in percent, without bullet voting, the majority in the third column can always elect 2 candidates. But once everybody is required to select their favorite, and this is what you would do in a district. You don't get to vote for 2 people in a district. You vote for 1. So citywide, people vote for 1. What happens is a cohesive minority group, or a minority group including like-minded crossover votes, can concentrate their strength as reflected in the last row. And with everybody having one vote, they can elect a candidate. This example here assumes that the majority splits their votes between two candidates. But even if they didn't do that, they'd only elect one. So a tool that was available and is available to Latinos to concentrate their vote is and make it more powerful or make it more effective by being strategic about how it is used, works well in a system where that is the order of the day. Everybody votes for your favorite candidate and the top two wins. It's neither mysterious, it's not unusual, it's common, and it's easy to understand. Christine?
Margarita, I think that I'm going to ask you to continue to help me, but our next discussion is why not districts in this case? And I wanted to provide a little bit more color on that as well.
Yeah, I did talk a little bit about this when I was into the demographics, and I want to also reiterate what the city attorney said. Right now, we're dealing in a voting rights context. I read all of the public comments. I read them all because I wanted to be helpful to the city administration today. And so I wanted to know what the people were thinking. And I saw a lot in the comment about community. And I also know very, very well, having seen the districts, that they probably are not the districts that, absent the voting rights context, anybody would think was an appropriate representation of San Luis Obispo's community. But in the context we're in now, with our CVRA notice, we're talking about voting rights. And so our focus is on the 20% of our community that is Latine, and what helps them participate more effectively in elections. As I mentioned, over a year and a half of study, it doesn't appear that that's going to be single member districts. None of them are strong enough. And not only are they not strong enough, but they actually prevent the Latino community in San Luis Obispo from working together to elect a candidate. And they may have the unintended consequence of knocking voting rights goals of the city backwards instead of moving it forwards. I think another thing to remember is, while not impossible, getting to district voting in San Luis Obispo is complex because you have a city charter, which is the organic law of the city that was voted in by the residents. And it requires at-large voting and a separately elected mayor. Somebody said, well, do we have to have 5 districts? Well, no. If we were to do districts under the current charter, they would likely be 4. But because they would be bigger, they would likely be even less effective than what we have as an example from SV Rep, because as a percentage of a district population, the Latine population would be even less. So to get to districts, there would have to be 1, if not 2 charter amendments. And those are required to be on a general election ballot. Those would need to pass in order to avoid litigation and finally get to some form of district elections, maybe in 2028. So we have the charter that needs to be respected. And by respecting a charter, a decision to move this project forward would have been delayed for years and maybe not happened at all. And the city then would have been, if people voted down districts, and the city would have faced litigation once again. And on a couple of times I've mentioned, while I've been talking to you, about potential unintended consequences. And I experienced this. I have a client that I'm working with now on precisely this issue. And the overlying school district of that client, without a good deal of analysis, decided to do their single member districts. They're called trustee areas for a school. Well, this client is a moderate sized city. It's not large by any means. And what happened is that none of the incumbents in the new trustee areas were challenged. And the trustee areas where there were no incumbents didn't give rise to a candidate. And the population was very upset that they had an election, but nobody had the opportunity to vote because the incumbents were not challenged were automatically elected. And the trustee areas where nobody ran is going to be appointed. They'll find some person willing to sit for a couple of years on the school board, and that person will be appointed. There will not be an election. This is not an unusual consequence in a small city where districts are even smaller. There's a smaller candidate pool. You can't vote outside of your districts, and appointments must be within those districts. And it becomes a problem for robust electoral activity. And then on the other side of that is often when, because of the lack of competition and the lack of activity in small districts, the council becomes ossified because nobody challenges the district representative. And so you don't have turnover on the council that is healthy for, that's why we have term limits. It's healthy for the council and healthy for new thought to the problems we face. I also want to say one other thing about district elections. I've been in the field for decades, and I've been noticing that the academic literature is gradually moving away from the consideration of district as the only, as a preferred, but actually the only remedy. And what we're finding is the federal courts accepting more creative approaches to voting rights to avoid some of the downsides of single member districts. And in fact, 85 or 90 jurisdictions in the United States actually use a form of voting similar to the citywide single vote that we're talking about here. So I proudly say of San Luis Obispo that they're on the cutting edge, and I wish you all the success in the world with it. From what I see, I think it has a very good chance of working. So, and next slide, City Clerk, if I might. Good. So why not ranked choice voting? As I said, I read every one of the comments. And I also know that ranked choice voting was addressed to the City Council back in 2019 when we got the first Voting Rights Act notice from a different group, from an individual. Why not ranked choice voting? Couple of reasons. Number one, there's a cost to it, but there's a feasibility which bears a cost. Our best information as we talk to you right now is the county isn't prepared to run them yet. They have to be brought online. The voting system that you use needs to be approved for ranked choice voting by the Secretary of State. And that's an expensive process. And last time I checked, because I've tried to do this for other clients, The cost of that is in the hundreds of thousands, and it's borne by the jurisdiction. You're not alone in this. I have clients in, of all places, Los Angeles County, who are very interested in using ranked choice voting. They have a unique voting system. It hasn't been engineered or adjusted or tested for ranked choice voting, and it still would need to be approved by the Secretary of State. That's why you don't see ranked choice voting south of some very sparse Northern California counties. How long the testing would take, I don't know. It could go quickly, it could go not quickly, but we're not there yet. And we can do the limited voting now because it doesn't take an engineering change to the voting system. Also, ranked choice voting is complex. What we're going to do with citywide single vote is what comes on the natural to most people. You have a choice, you vote for that choice, and you say, well, I'm not gonna, if somebody else wants somebody else, let them vote for that person. It's easy to understand. Ranked choice voting, especially in an at-large community, on an at-large basis, is complex. I read article after article about it, and every time I go to talk about it, I have to reread the articles because there's so many ways to allocate the votes that don't get used. And it's just got a lot of complexities. Right now, administration has a 2-year window to get the electorate ready to try a different proportional system, which is the citywide single vote. I am not sure that with citywide ranked choice, 2 years would be enough. And that would end up with voters disenfranchised, frustration, and dissatisfaction with the system. So it is complex. That's a second way of saying it's also very confusing. It's been in the news a lot lately because of some results in California that have resulted in recalls because the elected person was not able to do the job that was expected. And there's also been some nationwide questioning of ranked choice voting. I think it was on the ballot in 6 or 7 different jurisdictions, and it only passed in 1 or 2. And then the last thing and the most important thing for me, I mean, all of this is complex, and as I said, San Luis Obispo's got a highly educated population and will probably pick it up in a snap. But I also want to say that keeping on top of the academic literature, while it's beginning to be talked about now, there's less experience with ranked choice voting as a solution for voting rights allegations. There are academics that feel that it doesn't work at all, but it's just beginning to be considered as remedial, whereas there's a lot of experience with the single vote model. And what we're doing here is trying to come to a successful settlement that has the intended consequence, which is empowering the Latinx community as active participants in the voting group, but also hopefully eventually on the city council. We've had a long history of wonderful Latinx leaders, and we want that to continue. And we think that there will be more opportunity with the single vote system. Christine, did I miss anything?
I think that is very helpful. Thank you, Marguerite. And I would like to invite Mr. Shankman up to also share perhaps an alternate perspective, but certainly more perspective on those issues.
1 second, we're going to get that power on. There we go.
Yeah. My remarks will be brief, but I do want to start by commending Ms. Dietrich and outside counsel Ms. Leone. You know, in the many conversations that we've had, one thing was clear throughout, and that is that Ms. Dietrich genuinely cares about San Luis Obispo, not just as its city attorney, but also a member of the community. And I was impressed by that. And second, I want to commend both Ms. Dietrich and Ms. Leone for demonstrating that two sides of an issue don't need to agree on everything in order to come to an agreement that's in the best interest of all concerned. That's something that I think all of us can learn from, but maybe especially attorneys. There is certainly plenty that we have disagreed about and continue to disagree about, including some of what was in the presentation you just saw. I don't want to dwell on that, but I would like to mention one thing. In 2020, the Latino, African American, and Asian Pacific Islander caucuses of the California legislature wrote to the California Supreme Court, and that letter impressed the Supreme Court enough that it included that letter in its opinion in 2023 in Pico Neighborhood Association versus City of Santa Monica, a case that I argued. And what those caucuses said in that letter is that their members attributed their victories in elections to the legislature to districts that were between 20 and 49% minority, the applicable minority of the member, demonstrating that really it's a 50% district is not necessary, and proportions significantly less than that are effective, particularly in California. But I don't want to dwell on our disagreements, because what's important here is our agreement, not our disagreements. I do, however, want to address some of the written public comments that I was looking at last night. You know, there's a lot of different views in those public comments, and I think that's reflective of an engaged electorate, an engaged citizenry. Some said, you know, why are we changing it all? There's no problem here. Don't mess with what's worked. Some were positive about the recommendation for the settlement, and others expressed a sentiment. I'm paraphrasing here, but why are we messing around with this odd system of citywide single vote? Why aren't we just doing district elections like everyone else? And I'm somewhat sympathetic to that latter argument. Certainly more than Ms. Dietrich and Ms. Leone, but that didn't stop us from coming to an agreement. But what I would point out to those folks who have expressed that view, and perhaps will express that view tonight, is that the agreement contains guardrails, and that's important here. Certainly, a citywide single vote system is less used than single member districts. And in recognition of that, we have a system where the citywide single vote system will be evaluated 2026, 2028. Is it working? If it's not working, there's a procedure in place to get something that is going to work. So look, I'll conclude just that I look forward to this being a model for other California cities, both in terms of collaboration, the process that we've gotten here, and a creative resolution that both combats vote dilution and is suited to the particular needs of each peculiar community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shankman. And Council, I'll just conclude by saying, I'll go back to focusing on where we don't disagree, which is I want to convey for the community's benefit that we are, through proposing something other than districts in this instance at this moment in time are in no way suggesting that districts can't be, in the right circumstances, a very useful tool and a very effective tool to combat what has been historic racism embedded in our electoral systems. And we don't in any way want to diminish that underpinning of CIVRA or that objective of CIVRA to remediate those things. Again, our analysis is that the data just doesn't support that it's the right tool for this community at this time. But again, we preserve that flexibility to continue to reevaluate, to continue to respond to data. And with that, we will respond to council questions.
Thank you so much. Can you go back to either yourself or Mr. Shankman, referees, when looking at the data and debating if that data is correct or not, or that we agree on it or not, who would those referees be? Can you expand on that?
Mr. Shankman, do you want to address that? Because you certainly, and Marguerite as well, please feel free to weigh in, know these folks who operate in this world far better than I do.
So Marguerite and I have been opposing attorneys in several cases over the past, what's it been, like 12 or 13 years now. And over the course of that work, we've come to know a number of experts in the field that we both respect and that we both could agree upon. In this instance, I believe the order is Bernard Grofman, Nate Persily, and Christian Gross, three individuals that in the course of our discussions, we were able to agree upon that they would be experts on this. And so they wouldn't need a whole lot of education about the California Voting Rights Act and vote dilution and racially polarized voting and all that stuff. They could pick it up very quickly and resolve any dispute effectively.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you. Following up on your question, just a point of clarification. Determining the success or failure of the new system in 26 and 28, the referee process wouldn't kick in unless there was a disagreement. So there will be a first step of coming to the table without referees. Is that a correct understanding of the process?
That's correct. So the parties have agreed to a data sharing and collective data analysis following the 2026 and 2028 elections, and it is only if we disagree as to the conclusions to be reached or as to whether any conclusions can be reached based on that data that we would then turn to the referee to resolve that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And a question came in through some of the correspondence we got from the community. There were concerns around confusion around the switch and resulting invalid ballots, and just maybe wanted to dive a little bit more into, if we could, a discussion around how we will address kind of teaching the new system and potential problems that might emerge as a result.
Yes, so that is part of the reasoning behind the 2026 implementation, and I think that our first steps will be to reach out to our Latine community groups and ask about what voter education needs are, and understand what get out the vote and education and outreach is going on at the local level with our communities. SVREP is certainly an incredible resource with a long history of doing this kind of work, and so we'll certainly be seeking guidance from that avenue as well. But there will be a robust communication plan, but again, beginning with asking the questions about what the resources that folks feel that they need are and building from there.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question about the definition of the Latine preferred candidate and how one would go about deciding that based on the data. Is it determined by how many Latine voters voted for that person, or is it a way, or is it saying, well, we need someone with a Latin last name, or what, how exactly, or how usually is that defined? Thank you.
Sure. So it's the former. And the way that's determined, going back at least 40 years, is what's called ecological regression. You have all the data about who voted in each precinct, and you have the data of which candidates received how many votes in each precinct. And a regression analysis is performed on that data to estimate group voting behavior, estimate candidate A received a particular, 58% of the votes from Latino voters. Candidate B received 20. In that instance, candidate A would be the Latino preferred candidate, regardless of candidate A's ethnicity.
Thank you. Councilmember Shorsman.
Yes, thank you. In the staff report, as you all have alluded to, there was a proposed map that is the basis for our data gathering and analysis going forward. Some members of our community, as you've seen in the public comment, have expressed interest in districts, whether or not it's that map. And some of you have implied that maybe they might not like that map. So I'm just curious, what would the process be if we went to districts for coming up with our own map, and what does that cost? And I mean, do we all just get to choose? Can you explain what that looks like and how long it takes and what it might cost?
Marguerite, given that we would be looking to you for assistance with that, I'm going to ask you to address that question, please.
Okay, I'm happy to do so. The first step in an ordinary process would be putting a measure on the ballot. And there would be an initial decision about whether the city is going to go to 5 single-member districts or maintain the directly elected mayor and go to 4. And that would be subject to a ballot measure. As I said, it has to be on a statewide ballot. The next one of those that's available is going to be in 2026. So we could not have an election on that until that time. Assuming that the measure passes, there is a set of criteria and a set of an outline for a hearing process that usually covers about 90 days, but can go on for 180. Some jurisdictions enhance that with workshops and online tools to help with the districting process. There's generally submission by the public of a number of maps. They're empowered and enabled to draw maps with online tools. And in my experience, the cost of the process, there's got to be a minimal of 5 public hearings. Generally, there's more. The cost of the process usually runs between $50,000 and $75,000 for your consultant alone, depending on the bells and whistles that you think are appropriate for your community in the process. So it's lengthy. It takes some time to get there, and there is cost involved.
So we're talking about a couple, at least 5 hearings, what I heard you say, an election potentially. So we're looking at probably a minimum of a couple of years.
Oh, absolutely.
And Mr. Schenkman.
I really believe if we do the chart amendment, we wouldn't get off the ground with our first district elections until 2028.
Okay, and I think Mr. Schenkman is at the microphone too.
Yeah, so at I take issue with only one part of what Ms. Leone said, and that is the need for an election. And, you know, Ms. Leone and I can have a debate about the charter city authority and all of that. In fact, we did litigate this issue, or a similar issue at least, in an appeal that was decided in 2014, Ms. Leone and I. It's California Government Code 34886. If my dyslexia is not getting those numbers mixed up, that was amended sometime around 2015, 2016, or thereabouts, that provides that a city without a vote of the electorate can adopt district-based elections. So I don't think an election would be necessary.
And that's a charter city?
I believe it applies to both charter cities and general law cities.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And if I just may, in the most friendly of ways, just state that there has never been a decision about whether that does apply to charter cities, and the legislative history is ambiguous, but I don't want to dwell on it at all. That would be another matter for the city to decide. Do we proceed with election or without?
Thank you. I think the city attorney wanted to add.
Sure. I just wanted to maybe add a little bit more on that. I think that part of this debate swirls around whether or not there is evidence of or a ruling of a SIVRA violation, evidence of vote dilution, such that implementation of the district remedy without an election, contrary to the charter, is allowable. So that would, in this circumstance, certainly we do not believe that the evidence supports that the city has violated SIVRA or that there is sufficient evidence to support discriminatory vote dilution in the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Schwartzen, did you have more?
Thank you. Yeah, just thank you. It just provides some context about that it's a process. We couldn't just adopt any map and go forth. So appreciate that. I don't know if this is a question you could answer, Ms. Leone, but in the context of how cutting edge we are, better or worse, you had mentioned that there was another city that was trying some different approaches, and I'm curious if that's something that you can share, if it's a litigation issue and you can't, I understand.
No, I'm happy to do it. Actually, the city of Albany has settled a case with Mr. Shankman, and they are implementing ranked choice voting, which once again begs the question, why not here? And the reason, and Kevin can speak for himself, but I think he was skeptical, but anyway, Alameda County is already up and running with ranked choice voting in that county. And there are several cities in Alameda County that use the system, and so they can comfortably consolidate their elections with the countywide election and with the statewide election. San Luis Obispo, we are not there yet. So that is why that was more available to the city of Albany.
Okay, thank you. As my understanding is there's basically two barriers for us here with ranked choice voting, and that is that our county clerk has told us, or clerk recorder has told us that they don't have the capability and aren't able to do that right now. And then there's the Secretary of State issue as well. Am I oversimplifying that?
No, I think the summary is a good one.
Yeah, okay. And then last, the discussion of whether or not single voting is confusing, or how different that it is from what our previous system has been. I know we did have a discussion about this and how many people have actually sort of bullet voted or single voted already. And I know that information was in the report, but I wondered if somebody could kind of refresh our memory and state it for the public that was not reading the report.
So I went back and I looked at the past 3 elections, so 18, 20, and 22. And I right now can't remember exactly which one, but the order was, oh, sorry, thank you. In 2018, 53% of the votes cast were single vote. In 2020, 41%, and in 22, 44%. So it was a much larger number than I even imagined until I actually did the counts.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think that's all my questions for now.
Thank you. And I don't know if Marguerite, Mr. Shankman, or Christine have this information, but when I did a quick look, it looked like there were 6 cities in California that did the ranked choice voting. And as you mentioned, most of them are in Alameda County. We have Albany, Berkeley, Oakland, San Leandro, but we also had San Francisco and Palm Desert. And that was as of March 24. So I don't know if anything has changed since then. And if it has, great, not great, doesn't matter, just more of a factual knowledge.
Yeah, so Palm Desert was actually another city that Ms. Leone and I litigated and were on opposite sides of. That city did in fact implement ranked choice voting for one election. It was sort of a hybrid system. There was one single member district, and then there was another district that had 4 members, and the 4-member district employed ranked choice voting. The city's electorate has since decided that they would prefer simply single-member districts, and that passed through a ballot measure recently. So there was one ranked choice voting election there, but there is not likely to be any more. Albany is the only one, to my knowledge, that other than Palm Desert, that has employed a multi-member ranked choice voting system. I think the term ranked choice voting is maybe not so specific. There's a single member ranked choice voting system, which is employed in San Francisco, San Leandro, Oakland, Berkeley. I think those are the 4 that you mentioned. That's quite different. The city of Albany is the only one that's employed a multi-member ranked choice voting system other than Palm Desert.
Perfect, thank you, I appreciate that. At this time, I don't see any other questions from my colleagues, so I'm going to move forward to public comment. And just for those of you who haven't provided comment before, if you agree with something, we do kind of the ASL applause, or if you don't agree with something, you can feel free to do your boo sign, but we don't clap or cheer or anything of that sort. So just thought I'd give you a little heads up on how we do it. And remember, we are here to debate the issue, not the person. All right, so City Clerk, do you have any public comment?
Yes, we have 4 public speakers, and if you could line them up and be ready when your turn is up, that would be helpful. So our first speaker is Steve McGrath, Sean Witt, John Ashbaugh, Chelsea Ruiz.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, City Council members. My name is Steve McGrath. I'm a resident of San Luis Obispo. And as a little background, I am a retired public sector manager with some experience with the California Voting Rights Act, having in one position received a couple of these demand letters. One, if memory serves correctly, although we never had the pleasure of meeting, was from Mr. Shankman representing the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project. My agency did at that time choose to move to districted elections. I also want to recognize and thank the heavy lifting that has already been done that got us here to this point, even though it has been in closed session and out of public view. I recognize the enormous amount of work City Council, outside council, the council, and the plaintiffs. I want to make sure that I state that I am not here to speak against citywide single vote. I think it may well be a good solution for us. I'm not a big fan of the district elections. I think the poster child for that process would be the San Simeon Community Services District, which I believe has about 45 voters in each district. But I do want to make a couple of points. The first is one that should be answered by Council President, but and it's fundamentally that my understanding of the California Voting Rights Act is that only going to districted elections provides that indemnity from future litigation. So I am curious as to, given the fact that there are only two parties to the settlement agreement, does that preclude another entity from coming forward with a demand letter? And how would that play out? So I don't want to belabor that point. More to the point, though, and again, I'll repeat, I'm not a fan of the district elections. The one part about that process is if you go down that path through the stipulations in the California Voting Rights Act, you have a very robust public process to get there. There are a lot of public meetings, there is a lot of public input, and I'd simply say that I wish that at some point during these settlement discussions, a way had been found to implement a robust public process as a part of this. We've seen over the last few years the concerns about election integrity, and to do this after one meeting, it might have been better done other way.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sean Witt. Just moved here like 4 months ago. My wife was out canvassing, and I decided to look up to see what district I was in, and found out that there was no districts. Santa Cruz was by district. Prior to that, I lived in Elk Grove. It was also by district. And I remember the day that we got the letter, and they decided that it was in the best interest not to spend public funds on litigation and all the other things that come along with that. My thing is, everyone talks about the voting. The problem I have is with the protected class that wants to run for city council. At large, you got a 45,000 people or so. You got some mailers, you got signs, you got all this expenses that are way more than what if it was by district. And somehow, after listening to all this stuff, somehow all these other cities, I don't know the exact number, but well over 200, figured it out. And I don't understand why we're even at this point, why we didn't go to by district at the beginning of this. We would eliminate paying all this money out. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council and staff, and Ms. Leone by Zoom here. I'm John Ashbaugh. I served in this council for 8 years, and I appreciate the fact that you have so far resisted this pressure to move to district elections. However, I respectfully urge that you withhold support for the city staff recommendation to move to a citywide single vote election in order to avoid further litigation. I understand our staff is making this recommendation under duress to avoid threat of further litigation by the Southwest Voter Registration Project. Litigation is costly. Its outcome is always uncertain. And as a council member from 2008 to 16, I spent many, many hours with our council embroiled in this kind of contest. I wouldn't wish to have you any further unnecessarily engaged in that type of swordplay. Same time, I don't wish this proposed solution to become adopted without serious consideration of its deleterious legal, ethical, and political consequences. Two major objections to this proposal. First, the city's voters would be deprived of being able to vote for two candidates of their choice to fill both seats that accord with their views. Secondly, I think there's a high likelihood for confusion on the part of many voters who are accustomed, as I am, to being able to vote for 2 council members. And their votes, if they do in fact cast 2 votes for where only 1 is allowed, they would be counted as spoiled and rejected by the county clerk. Now, my wife and I have lived in this city and voted here for 36 years. Based on that experience and my service on this city council, it's my opinion this proposal would have a pernicious and unintended effect of seeing representation on our council shift away from one where the 2 most qualified and most desired candidates are elected. Instead, we're going to be saddled with a system where only 1 candidate in each election cycle is truly desired by the majority of voters. The second place candidate could win merely by mustering as few as 25% of the voters or even fewer to rally behind them. I testified in public comment before the first council closed session on this in November 2019 when we were first presented with a CVR claim against the city. At that time, I recommended the city fight this threatened litigation, and you did so. We all agreed that the demand we move to district elections seemed to be a solution in search of a problem which does not exist in this city. 5 years later, it's still the case that this litigation appears to be undertaken only to enable the plaintiffs to obtain substantial attorney fees as part of a settlement agreement while imperiling the city's tradition of free, fair, and widely accepted elections. There must be a better way. I've proposed one. If you have to go to district elections at all, I propose you go to two-member council districts, splitting the city in half, with each election cycle electing 1 member from each of those districts. I think that would resolve this problem. I encourage you to consider that, and I think you might even think about dividing the city pretty much along the 101 freeway, east and west.
Thank you, Mr. Ashbaugh.
After Chelsea Ruiz, it's Jim D'Antona and then Stu Jenkins.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Ruiz. I've been a resident of the city of San Luis Obispo for 3 years, and I'm privileged to work with the local Latina and mixed status populations. And I am speaking in favor of the recommendation by the city staff to move to a single vote system as opposed to a district-wide election. And I'd like to comment that I really appreciate the thoughtful and inclusive manner in which the city attorney has sought feedback from our local Latina leaders and considering how best to respond to this demand. And I have 3 reasons why I prefer for the Latina population the single voting system over districts. I'll outline them in order of least to most important. First of all, it's low cost, it's easily implemented, and it's easier to understand than other things like the multiple voting system. Second of all, it preserves the ability of residents to vote citywide as opposed to just 1 district. And third and most importantly, it preserves options for the entire city to vote for Latina preferred candidates instead of restricting that to 1 single district. And as has been mentioned, the benefits of district elections are in communities where predominantly Latina neighborhoods and preferred candidates are defeated in general elections regularly. And in San Luis Obispo, we don't have geographic congregations of Latina persons, and neither, in my opinion, do we have an abundance of Latina preferred candidates yet. So I just have 2 examples that I'd like to share of unintended consequences of different communities that share similarities to San Luis Obispo that have moved from citywide to district elections. For example, the city of Paso Robles, which actually does have geographic congregations of Latina individuals, recently moved to the district-wide, and Maria Garcia was a Latina preferred candidate. She was elected, and then when she moved out of the area, she had to give up her seat. And in Ojai, they also moved to districts. Councilmember Sousa Francina was elected, and then she was evicted and lost her seat. And so limiting our voting power to districts would limit our residents' ability to vote on Latina preferred candidates. And I just appreciate the city attorney and the city's thoughtfulness and your efforts on DEI and the funds spent on these initiatives. And I just feel that the city's recommendation to preserve citywide voting is thoughtful and will give our Latina preferred candidates the best chance at not only getting elected, but staying elected in our really competitive housing market. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I am Jim D'Antona, President and CEO for the San Luis Obispo Chamber of Commerce. I'm here today to convey the SLO Chamber's recommendation of how the City of SLO should move forward with the California Voting Rights Act lawsuit. I do want to note that we took this to our board for a decision well in advance of the city's correspondence on this item, and so my comments will try to incorporate all our thoughts along with the current information. I want to start by making it clear that we believe at-large elections are working in SLO and that this election system is in the best interest for our city. The diverse council sitting before me that is made up of all women who are all voted in using an at-large election system. This speaks volumes to the fact that this election system is not causing vote dilution of marginalized or unrepresented groups in the city of SLO. However, that did not stop the attorney, Mr. Shankman, from filing this lawsuit against us, and now we must adjust the way our city votes. We believe the city moving to districted voting would be harmful to the city of SLO because it changes the culture of the council. Council members would likely be more narrowly focused on the district rather than the whole council serving as a team to do what is in the best interest of the entire city. Additionally, districted voting could end up with many candidates in one district of the city, while another district might not have any or only one candidate. For these reasons, and personally from a career in districted municipality, the SLO Chamber believes districted elections should not be considered as an option at all. Our board recommends the city move forward with ranked choice voting. The system allowed the whole city to vote for all the candidates and kept the council candidates focused on a citywide plan, benefited candidates who have wider appeal, and have shown to help racial minority candidates break through that ceiling. While this is the preferred method of the SLO Chamber, we understand that there are many logistical challenges, from needing completely new hardware, software, and a sizable financial investment to make that switch. Whether the city chooses ranked choice or the citywide single vote system, we agree that making the election citywide is far better system than the districted plan. The districted plan, to meet the challenge of creating a racial minority district, created some very gerrymandered districts and destroyed the idea of a council focused on citywide success. It is unfortunate that we will have to change our election system because we believe that the current system in place is best for our city. But we are all in this together, and we plan to work closely with the city, however you choose to ultimately move forward, to make this new citywide voting plan a success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is Stu Jenkins.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm Stu Jenkins, and when I moved here, there were 14,000 people, and it was much smaller. And so perhaps in that environment, at-large elections made more sense, but we're approaching 50,000. I know the sign on the freeway doesn't say that. I don't believe it anymore. I think there's more folks here when I walk around. Districts are the traditional American way to spread power for voters geographically, so every side of the city has an advocate. That is the best way for people to have diversity and representation. That doesn't mean that someone from a particular district is unconscious of the needs of the whole city. It just gives an advocate. I support going to districts. However, I think that Mr. Shankman and your council have arrived at a good settlement with one thing put in your laps. If you don't spend enough money and time letting folks know about the new system, you will have wasted votes. You will have people voting for two because that's what they've been doing, well, as long as I've lived here. So you really need to focus on that. My prediction is that as this experiment, the cutting edge or the bleeding edge, we've all heard that, as this experiment proceeds, that the city will want to go to districts. And I think the voters of the city will want to go to districts so they can have an advocate in each neighborhood. But again, if the council and the staff, and frankly, the political parties and the interest groups don't go out and educate voters on the need to single shot, and I can tell you my family's done that many times. We made the difference in one election. Otherwise, you're going to have people spoiling their votes. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have one question, Mr. Shankman, that continues to plague me. So before we have deliberation and all of that, you know, we all do different personality trait things, and we did the strength finders, and I will say, much to many of my administrators' chagrin, communication is one of my strengths, and I believe that with a lot of communication, we can outreach, we can make change. We've seen that happen in San Luis Obispo in many different ways. I understand that SV Rep is not from here, they don't know our community, but they're trying to do a good thing. Why not have actual conversations here first before jumping to the CVRA letter? I fully understand that's the process in California and that's the way people get money, and that's your job. But why not actually have a conversation first in our community and give people here the chance to educate about what's working and what's not working with CVRA?
Sure. Those conversations did take place.
No, not before we got a letter.
Yes, before that letter.
Okay.
And those conversations don't take place in a public setting like this. They can't.
Why not?
Well, I think there's a variety of reasons, and I don't want to focus this on San Luis Obispo. Prefer to talk. Well, no, I get that, but just more generally, why would those conversations not take place in an open setting?
Yeah.
Is largely a fear of retaliation, and we have seen this in other places. Where plaintiffs have been threatened physically, their families have been, in Palmdale, one of our plaintiffs, his mother-in-law, she worked for a nonprofit that the city threatened to defund the nonprofit. There was funding that went to, in Santa Monica, our individual plaintiff worked for the Pico Youth and Family Center. That was, and her husband was the executive director. They in fact did defund the Pico Youth and Family Center. I think generally speaking, particularly with minority communities, there is a reluctance to come forward in that sort of public setting, and we don't want to expose anyone to that. Now, I'm sure that you would say that wouldn't happen in San Luis Obispo. We as a council wouldn't do that, and I don't take issue with that. But as a general matter, that's why we don't have those conversations in public at the outset.
I hear you on that. I don't want anyone to ever have to go through what you were just describing. My question was actually before they become a plaintiff. Why was that conversation not had in the community first? Whether it's the Latinx community, whether it's the diversity coalition group, whatever groups that are effectively in the CVRA protective classes, why did those conversations not happen first as to why people weren't feeling as though they were able to vote for the person they wanted to or be the candidate they want to do? That's my question.
So I don't think it's about voting for the person you want to, or but in terms of conversations, I think your question has the premise of the conversation should have occurred with this established group or that established group. that's not necessarily representative of everyone in the community. And so, you know, we get calls from all sorts of people all across the state of California. And sometimes that's groups. Sometimes it's labor unions. And oftentimes it's simply individuals who are not affiliated necessarily with any particular established group.
Okay, well, that's where we 100% agree is no group is ever a monolith, and I hear you in that. So thank you for explaining that. Before I continue, I'll go ahead and pass it on. Councilmember Francis.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick question before we dive into deliberations here. In a couple of the correspondence we received, and then again in public comment, there was the question about the nature of the safe harbor and if the settlement provides that to us. And I was wondering if we could get a little clarification from the city attorney on that.
Sure, I'll do my best and then maybe ask Marguerite to weigh in. And so Mr. McGraw is correct that the only 100% shield against civil litigation is district elections presently. I will say that there has been, as Marguerite pointed out earlier, sorry, I'm having some throat issues. The CIVRA does not mandate any particular remedy. And so there are other remedy paths available. It is possible that someone could disagree that this is the appropriate remedy or an effective remedy. That is why we have structured this as a stipulated judgment subject to the continuing jurisdiction of court oversight, and also put in the benchmarks to evaluate efficacy in terms of enhancing voter equity. So we believe that those things are effective guards against that and move us forward. And also I will note that the California Supreme Court recently in Mr. Shankman's PICO case did explicitly reference other remedial measures to address the alleged CIVRA violations. And I don't know if either Marguerite or Kevin would like to add to that.
Marguerite, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'm happy to. One thing that we were encouraged about in our negotiations is the recognition by the California Supreme Court in the Santa Monica case that given at the local level, there are many different alternatives that are well known and well studied to remedy potential violations of the California Voting Rights Act. So yes, in that act, the very clear permanent protection is an appropriate set of single member districts. But there are other criteria in the California Voting Rights Act that would be protective to the city. One of those is the existence of racially polarized voting. That's not presumed, it has to be proved. Secondly, the lack of electoral success. So if this a citywide vote system does lessen racially polarized voting by coalition building behind a candidate, and or if it results in the election of preferred candidates, those two are also protective from a future CVRA action. But I do want to point out that the agreement anticipates, it protects against not having things come out the way that we hope. If there is an indication that it isn't working, the council has the opportunity to change at any time. And then, as Mr. Shankman said, there's also guardrails in that district, in the settlement agreement. Now, the settlement agreement gives this 2 years, 2 election cycles, not years, election cycles to prove itself. If a litigant were to come in, it's likely that a court would say, look, you've got to give this an opportunity to work before you can presume it's automatically not going to have a remedial effect. So that is built into the settlement agreement as a protection against a group who's unaffiliated with SVREP, who sees an opportunity, ignores the change, and decides just to challenge the city. So I think as a matter of course in litigation, a court would give us some leeway to prove ourselves and to prove the new districts. But in addition, that's taken into account in the settlement.
Hold on one second. We have city attorney.
Sorry, I might just add that, PICO did offer, while it wasn't the magic wand that answered all of the questions in the SIVRA arena, it certainly did add some clarity to what needs to be proven to establish a violation of SIVRA. And it is not simply evidence of racial polarization, but evidence of vote dilution and an alternative that will better address that defect than the current system. And so that is a different barrier, I think, or a clearer barrier. I think practitioners like Mr. Shankman would say that they've been doing that for some time. I know that there are others that I think have leaned more heavily on a presumption that racial polarization on its own was going to do the job in every instance, and I think we're now clear that that is not the case.
Thank you. Mr. Shankman, do you want to add anything? Okay, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. Okay, thank you for your patience. Come back, and Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you so much. We've had a lot of thank yous, and I will reiterate them all. Just an appreciation of being able to have cooperation. So to start with kind of a frustration that this is a process that we have to go through, and at the same time recognizing that voter rights are critical and part of all of our belonging, and so to have our community participate. So I won't rehash those. I am in support of the settlement as we have worked long and hard to develop, and I'm glad that all the parties are coming together. The only things that I would add is I think that the single vote will change up the council. I think whatever underrepresented group might emerge. And so I think that we are going to want that education process sooner rather than later, so that the broader community understands not just how to mark a ballot, but the broader implications that were suggested in terms of rallying and how we want to be as a community. I think also the comments from folks who feel like we may not, council at large isn't representing every neighborhood. I always think that's interesting, because like another city that has districts, their district might have 100,000 people, right? I mean, in a big city, it's not like there's some magic number that one person can represent and represent well. So anyway, I think that there's an evolving process, a lot of conversations to happen in the future. I appreciated the comment about, gee, it sure would have been nice to have something about a public process. And I know how it happened kind of incrementally and why we didn't, and yet I do take that to heart for future consideration. Is could there be ways to have conversations in more generic sense, so folks get a sense of what is going on without necessarily corrupting the closed session kind of process. So I'm super curious where this goes in terms of what the impacts are for the city, but at just a bigger picture about what voting looks like, what the thought of having a Latinx preferred candidate, is that concept relevant and to what extent, et cetera. So I think overall, our DEI goals have been hugely just, wanting belonging, right? So whatever politics there is, we just want everyone to feel a part of the community and heard and seen. And then my last note is just that I do, I think ranked choice voting, I hope that comes back. I hope that we figure out a way to at least explore that in the future, as I do think that that's a really important process from what I know is complex. I don't think it's right for us right now, but I do hope that that stays on our radar. That's it.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you for kicking us off here, Vice Mayor Pease. Just to say again, we as a council have had a long 2 years to digest and discuss these electoral issues. And I know that many community members are coming to this for the first time, and it feels abrupt. And I wish that this process up to this point could have been more inclusive of the community, but unfortunately, as we've already talked about, the nature of litigation is that it happens behind closed doors. We heard from a number of community members who wrote in support of the compromise presented here tonight and other alternative strategies, as well as some who wanted to move to districts. And while I'm really sympathetic to the idea of neighborhood representation, the California Voting Rights Act that we're here to discuss tonight is very specifically meant to give voice to a protected class. And the research done thus far around the California Voting Rights Act is that a move towards districts in a community with our demographics can have the effect of diluting the votes of our Latina neighbors even further. And so when faced with this lawsuit, I believe my goal, and I believe the goal of my colleagues, was to support whatever resolution achieved the laudable goals of the California Voting Rights Act. And I think we share the aim of the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project of ensuring fair and equitable access to representation and voter education materials. So I'm really grateful we were able to reach a resolution that focused on those goals. After looking at our demographic data and the election results and all of the scholarship in this arena, I just became convinced that a move to districts was not the right move for our community. There's a ton of academic work in this arena, and I won't get into it all because I think Marguerite did a really nice job covering all of it. But considering all those factors, the staff recommendation presented here really provides the best path forward for supporting the diversity, equity, and inclusion goals of our community. And I really look forward to analyzing the data from future elections to ensure that we achieve those goals. So thank you all for all of the hard work here. And that's it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a little prerogative and go next, and then there's Councilmember Shorsman and Marks. First, I feel very disappointed in the way this has to happen. I understand, as Councilmember Francis alluded to, CVRA being the California Voters Rights Act. And it's this moment where sometimes I feel like in an appeal where the overall logic doesn't necessarily match the moment, because CVRA is surgical. It's about, like you said, members of a specific race, color, or language minority group. This is not about districts in a neighborhood. The American way, well, the American way has been racist. I mean, that's reality. But that's not what we're talking here. That is why we're talking here, is because the American way has been racist. And so when people are missing at this table, that has been the concern. Now, when I joined in 2018, I was the first ever Black person to be on this council as council member or mayor. I joined this council with Councilmember, well, at the time, Councilmember, Vice Mayor Pease now, and at the time, Councilmember Aaron Gomez, two Mexican-American individuals. So not that that is, the answer, end all be all. We've had a few, call it good, because I get that comment often. But to me, I was seeing slowly but surely different changes. People who own businesses, people who didn't, people who were young, people who were older, people who had kids, people who didn't. We've been starting to slowly change through the years. I'd say the last 20 years. I don't know, you would tell me better. And I've been in this community since 1990, And I've watched this community slowly change. And that's because of, some of it because of growth, but some of it just because of diversification of businesses and, or industries and housing types. And so when I think of, there are so many other marginalized communities that we're not talking about today. Gender, age, LGBTQIA+, economic status, people with disabilities. I could go on with the Department of Fair Employment Housing protected class list. But again, that's not part of this protected class. This is only about race, color, or language minority. So here we are. This is a path that we have to talk about this. I also look back to our land use circulation element. I look back to the DEI task force, diversity, equity, inclusion task force. I look at so many conversations this community has had, hard conversations, difficult conversations, and conversations where we come together and we do outreach and we discuss and we come to a conclusion. Not everyone agrees with the conclusion, and I totally understand that, but we come to a conclusion and compromise, and we were not allowed to do that. And that is something that is very frustrating because, as I shared earlier, communication is very important to me, and communication with all the people at the table. You know, there's a saying, which is nothing for us without us. And I think that's the intent of California Voters' Rights Act. But because this is another statewide legislative policy that is one size fits all, again, the question about safe harbor, well, we're not even given any opportunity to say, hey, let's look at ranked choice. Let's look at limited voting and feel that we are really safe to actually analyze this, try it, educate, outreach. Nope, it's still that's the only way. And I've gone to the state, I've gone to our senator, I've gone to other cities statewide and said, this doesn't make sense. There should be other options in the safe harbor aspect of this legislation. But too many people are afraid of being called racist, so they won't even consider. And I get that. But if the spirit of this law was about how do we help people have a voice, in this moment, they're actually taking away some of the voice if we go to districts. And that, you know, the easy way would just be like, easy button, districts, let's go. But to me, that's not my job. My job is to speak for people who are not here today. And when I listened to the responses from all the leaders in the community who are from a bunch of different Latino, Latinx, Latina, Hispanic groups, what they said was, this is not what we want. Districts is not, this would not work for us. We would not be as represented in this situation. And then also when we go to district, as someone mentioned, it's still one vote too. So whether you go to limited voting or district voting, we're again just diluting the voice. So I appreciate SV Rep and Mr. Shankman wanting to have the shared objectives with our city and trying to come to the best compromise we can. I still feel that targeted, intentional education and outreach would have been the best way to start this conversation. But instead, we'll have to take that targeted, intentional education and outreach in how to vote. What does this mean? What are the intended consequences, the unintentional consequences? And as the city attorney mentioned, districts are not off the table. We now have, I think, a parallel opportunity to continue to talk about districts as well as try this limited voting. As shared, we have 40 to 50% of people who do this already anyway. So that logic won't be too difficult. But I think that the education as to why and how is going to be important. One of the emailers today, or this last couple of days, shared how they were a poll worker and people would come and say, I'm here to vote. And they're like, sorry, you're in the wrong place. You need to go over here. And districts, I see that continue that process of confusion. But again, with the right education, we can make that work too. So I don't love the idea of this limited voting. I think it is exactly what we just said, is limited. I know we're talking about citywide single voting because that's really what it is. And some people even have referred to it as power voting because you get the power of choosing who is going to be up here. I also want to share an example that I shared with someone earlier. Some people have been concerned with, well, if you have 2 people to vote for, then what if, well, if you have two people you would typically vote for right now, we have 3 or 4 people, the weirdest person might be chosen is totally not what the majority of people want. Well, that's kind of the whole point, though, of what we're here for today, is the racist challenges and why the Voter Rights Act was created in the first place. Is we have a majority 70% white community. It appears to people outside of our community that that's what we want to keep. So this is an attempt from the state of California and from the people who are ready to sue the city to come to a compromise and try to help people get their voice heard that may not feel their voice is being heard, and to help remedy the way we vote. So that's why I would, again, we have a lot of nauseously accepting staff recommendation lately, but that's why I would hesitantly accept the staff's recommendations. Councilmember Schwartzman.
Well, you pretty much hit the nail on the head right there. No, I'll just re-emphasize just a couple of things and give you all my perspective, but you did say a lot of the things that I've been thinking and feeling. This is super frustrating to be in this position. It is another unhappy decision that we've had to make recently, and we first got the letter, the demand letter, not too long after I came on council. And so we've been talking about this almost the entire time that I've been on council. And I'll just be honest, when we first got it, I was a little bit shocked, especially since we as a city have put a very, very high value on goals around DEI and making sure everyone feels that they are welcome and heard in this community. And to feel like we are doing such great work in this area and then be forced to kind of contemplate changing our whole voting system, it was just a shock. There's just no other way to say it. And I know it's a shock to all of you that you have expressed that this feels really sudden and it feels like something you weren't expecting, and it's all been decisions made behind closed doors. But I want to assure you that, in my opinion, this is just the beginning of the discussion. Sure, we've had to discuss a lot of this because of all the reasons that we've talked about, in a closed session environment. But we have looked at all the data, backwards and forwards, upwards and down. And I think that we are making the best decision that we can given the situation that we're in right now with the data available we have right now. We will be able to continue through this process to keep looking at the data, see how our city changes, reevaluate every 2 years and probably in between whether or not a different solution is good for us or better for us at the time as we approach that moment. But right now, this is the best thing that we can do for the financial reasons, for our community's understanding reasons, and trying to adopt something that they will understand and be comfortable with. A large percentage of our population has already been single voting or bullet voting, so for some it won't be new. But the thing that I think I am most actually, if I could be looking forward to a part of this process, is the part of the agreement that requires but pushes us to do a better job with our DEI initiatives and to do a better job with voter education and voter registration and advancing and lifting up minority populations without a voice or who have had maybe a quieter voice in this process. So this is our challenge as a council and our challenge to our city staff to really do an exceptional job and make sure that the voices that aren't being heard now get a chance to be heard in a very real and comprehensive way. So that's what I'm looking most forward to. I think that we could continue, as I said, to discuss districts. I think we should continue to have robust conversations about all of the options that may be before us, even if they're not before us right now at this moment, so that we can create a process where our community, again, as we've been striving to do in so many ways, be heard.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, I have to say that I agree with every single one of you, every single thing you said, and this is why people think this council always agrees with each other. Well, in this particular regard, I definitely agree, and I'll tell you, it's it has caused a lot of, when you're saying shock, but also soul searching and really deep thought in terms of the whole community and what we're looking at right now. I want to say that I think the legislature made a big mistake when they didn't differentiate between the large cities and the small cities and the small entities. One of the speakers mentioned San Simeon, CSD. They only have 45 voters in the whole CSD, and then they had to divide up into districts, and nobody wants to do it, you know. And so they have a situation where they're thinking of disbanding the CSD. Because and just saying, okay, county, you run us, because they can't function, you know. So we don't face that kind of situation, but I do think that the legislation itself has got to be revised to recognize that cities under a certain population, maybe under 50,000 or 75,000, I don't know. It's a whole different thing. So I also want to say that to the point about what's called undervotes, right, in terms of our city. It is a well-known strategy. I have to say, this is my 16th, I'm finishing up my 16th year on city council. I just got reelected for another 4 years. And in my experience, there is a well-known strategy to say, just vote for me. I mean, and the people who are on your side, the people who are taking your signs, the people who are donating to you, people who are coming to your events, you say, just vote for me, just vote for one person. And I have heard a rumor that other candidates running, there were 4 of us this time, for the 2 city council seats, also had that same strategy. And why is that? It's because one vote also shrinks the pool of voters. And so it's almost like having 2 votes. It's almost like doubling the strength of your vote. So I think that there is, it's been referred to as a natural pattern, but I'm not sure I would call it that. It's more a strategic pattern that's evolved over the years. But the other thing I wanted to say is that we don't traditionally make slates. People don't run on slates. Each candidate, we might know which candidate we hope would also win, but we all have our own campaigns, and we campaign hard for ourselves. This time around, tomorrow we'll get more figures, but right now, of the 16,000 votes cast, 10,000 of them were undervotes. So it's almost like 1/3 undervotes. I think an important fact is that the top 2 vote getters will be seated, and it's the same thing as now. It's the same. It'll be, even if it's just single vote, the single vote system, the top 2 vote getters will be seated. And I'm actually hopeful that this change in voting will increase the opportunity for minority groups, however they identify themselves, to create stronger coalitions in terms of their voting conduct. And I think Michael Latner's simplified diagram that showed how that could work was really a real breakthrough for me, because I wanted to have a really simplified way of thinking about how the single voting could actually benefit a minority group. So I'm just going to end by saying that we were faced with basically three options when we received that letter from Mr. Schenkman. Cave and make districts without thinking about it, as you were talking about, Mayor Stewart. Fight and realizing that there was a good chance that we might lose the fight, and also just, it could be like a black hole for city funds. Very expensive. And so what we've come to with the single voting is the best we can do under the circumstances. And I do actually feel a lot of hope in going forward at this point. So I'm going to also support the staff recommendation.
Thank you. I appreciate how your frustration has turned into hope. I'm hoping to get there. Vice Mayor Pease.
We're done with deliberation. I'd like to move the staff recommendation again with gratitude to all involved and the patience that took to get here.
Thank you, Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, I will second that.
Thank you. And I do want to echo, as you shared, there's been so much work from all of the council involved. The Latinx community and Latina community has been involved. And I really look forward to what our education will end up being, our outreach. And I think you said it absolutely correctly, Councilmember Schwarzman, is, okay, let's step up our game and do it better. And that's we're willing to do it. So thank you. City Clerk, can you have roll call?
Vice Mayor Pease.
Yes.
Councilmember Francis.
Yes.
Councilmember Marks.
Yes.
Councilmember Schwarzman.
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes, and the motion passes 5-0. Thank you so much. All right, we have the last bit, which is council liaison reports and committees. And I think before we go on to our reports, I hope it's okay, I'm a little switch this up a little bit. There was a public comment that had been emailed to us, and the person had hoped to be here, but they couldn't be. And they were really hoping that we would take up the conversation of updating the, hold on, I want to get it right, updating the unruly gathering code, Muni code. And with, sadly, St. Patrick's Day around the corner and what behavior that's happened in our community, I thought this would be a good time to bring this up so that we can get this into the agenda. We have a very busy agenda or agenda items over the next couple of months with the budget and all of that. But at the same time, not hearing a lot from Cal Poly in the community, I feel like this is the right time to at least have this conversation. So any thoughts about that? Councilmember Schwarzman?
I guess I wonder if that's feasible. Are you thinking between now and St. Patrick's Day? I guess that's
yes,
more
I
of
am.
a question for staff to add something to our already packed agenda, and I don't want to send staff screaming the other direction.
I know, I don't either. City Manager.
Thank you. So a few considerations. I think just logistically, in order for an ordinance to be in effect as of that date, we need to have it adopted 30 days ahead of time. So we're looking at by February, we would need to, by our first meeting in February, essentially, we would need to have our second reading of an ordinance. Our agendas are definitely packed. I don't know how we would make it fit. I don't know if something would need to move. The other consideration, I think, we've taken a quick look at what was presented and talked with our city attorney and our police chief. We do have provisions on our books now that address the behavior of, specifically related to being on rooftops as part of an unruly gathering that was put in place after the roof collapse incident back in 2015. And it is a tool that our law enforcement has at its hands and disposal now. The proposed language, I believe, it would make a lot of things mandatory and really provide some thou shalt type of language in terms of the way we would be required to prosecute any type of behavior in that way. So I think that from a staff perspective, we would need time to evaluate it. We'd want to explain some of our concerns with the proposed approach, and certainly that would take a fair amount of time, but at the end of the day, I don't know in terms of what it would give us. It would change things, but.
So it sounds like we actually have enough within what our current ordinance that the chief and all of the different department heads within the city could make some changes without having to have a whole ordinance come back.
That's right. At this point in time, we believe we have what we need in order to the extent we can. I mean, one of the issues with the activity is that even with what's proposed, there are significant safety concerns with, say, law enforcement going onto a roof and attempting to try to get folks down. That the issue would be trying to keep people, if there's enough of a hammer essentially in our code, then maybe it would deter the behavior. But other than that, it's not going to give us much more on the ground.
Great, I appreciate hearing that. Councilmember Francis. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just wanted to, I asked the question, but I also just wanted to thank you for that. And it does make me a little bit uncomfortable. I did see the email and the request, and I appreciate the legwork that was done in advance to bring us something that seems, somewhat baked and is not something that we would have to start from scratch on. But I do feel a little bit uncomfortable with pushing something through on such a short time frame, and think it would be better if we use the tools that we have available to us right now, and continue to work with Cal Poly and with neighborhood groups to kind of try to get ready and be prepared and do the best we can to deter bad things from happening in St. Fratty's Day in the meantime, but still calendar this or look for a date when we could continue to discuss this a little more robustly.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to cut you off. Councilmember Francis.
I would agree with that, but was actually chiming in for my liaison report.
And Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, I think it's good for this council to start thinking about St. Fratty's Day. And I, at one time, my council had to shut down the Mardi Gras. And we appointed a subcommittee. It was myself and Christine Mulholland, and we actually spent a lot of time going around and talking to these wonderful local volunteers who had started the tradition and wanted to keep it, but basically the message was it's gotten out of control. It's not a local celebration anymore. It has to stop. And I feel that we should consider appointing a subcommittee of people from this council to work closely with Cal Poly and with a goal, as far as I'm concerned, of shutting down St. Fratty's Day. I think it needs to end. Chico got rid of the Pioneer Days. I think Santa Barbara got rid of the Halloween celebration. It's possible. Every year it gets worse, as far as I'm concerned. And now we have situations where students who were not participating were actually trapped in their homes. It's not on the agenda. I'm not going to talk about it too much. But I wonder if would be willing at some point to just take a stronger hand as a council to try to deal with the situation.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you. I do agree that council involvement with St. Patrick's Day would be appropriate. I'm pretty opposed to bringing back something that's prescriptively against being on a roof, being a big fan of sitting on a roof with my family. So I think that if we have other tools to deal with rowdy, unsafe behavior on roofs, let's use the tools we have. But macro level, I appreciate that the neighbors are they're looking for ways for us to, for our law enforcement, et cetera, to have tools to manage that crowd. So I think that we should, big picture, be looking at that.
Great, thank you. And I will say that I did meet with two members of leadership at Cal Poly last week, and they're really trying to focus on what they can do to make a difference in St. Patrick's Day. So I look forward to us continuing to talk about this. City Attorney.
I just want to, from a prosecutorial perspective, obviously my prosecutorial authority is under the municipal code. I want to assure the council and the neighborhood that we do have the tools we need to criminally prosecute people who are engaging in unruly gatherings, included in the definition of an unruly gathering is occupying roof space that is not built for occupancy. And so that is one of the enumerated violations under our unruly gathering ordinance. And as your prosecutor, let's start the communication early and often now. I am willing to criminally prosecute those. And tactically, if we are able to identify people engaging in that kind of behavior, I will criminally prosecute it.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, just to kind of continue this conversation a little further, I think we have this power currently, but we haven't, is it that we really haven't exercised it to the extent that we could? Are we going to use it differently this year? Are we proposing doing something a little bit different as a council? I'm hearing from Councilmember Marks that a subcommittee has been put in place in the past. Is that something that the council is looking to explore to kind of approach this in a different way this year? Or are we just going to look at kind of maybe using some of the tools that we have in a different way this year? So I'm trying to wrap my head around what are we going to do differently?
Yeah, City Attorney.
So obviously your attorneys aren't the boots on the ground that are out there doing your crowd management, and I'm certainly not going to speak for my police chief and the folks that are, because there are tactical decisions that have to be made in the interest of community safety and officer safety and the safety of people who are uninvolved but in proximity. And so I certainly would defer to the folks who have the expertise in developing those plans to do that. I think what I would communicate to the council and the community is that we are hearing loud and clear that the neighborhoods are sick to death of the escalation, that the conduct is unacceptable and is impinging on the rights of other people. I think no one is, oblivious to the fact that we were all college-age students at one time and probably engaged in conduct that was not advisable or, something that our parents would be proud of. But it has escalated to a point where it is really impacting the welfare of our neighborhoods. We hear that as a staff, and we are prepared to be responsive. So I'll defer to, obviously, my police chief. However, to the extent that it is safe and to do so, and they are able to identify people, I do want folks to be aware that we do have those tools and we will exercise them.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I think that I know that the chief's not here right now, but I know that he's gone to a meeting with the task force, and maybe we can touch base with him, city manager, and figure out if there's a plan for them to come and talk to us here at the City Council, or if there's another plan for a more public-facing education and outreach. That would be probably helpful before we make a next active step, I think, from the dais. But that's just my 2 cents. Councilmember Marks?
I don't know if Cal Poly has gotten the message that the city of San Luis Obispo wants this event to stop. You think they have? I haven't heard that. I'm afraid that we're going to be faced with the same situation in March that we had last March, and they start planning winter quarter. The fraternities who run it, okay, they start planning in December. People order their costumes and then they're ready to go by spring. But there's a lot of planning that goes in, and Cal Poly has not. Also, the dorms, there's underage drinking going on in the dorms. The Cal Poly has not stopped that. There's just a lot. maybe it's because I'm out of touch with what is really going on. It's possible. But I'm feeling that we need to give a strong message that this event has to stop. It's costing our city money. And it's really, you know, I think it's a bad message to their student body. And these freshmen are intelligent, loved family members from all over the place, and they come here. And one of the first really big experiences that they have is St. Friday's Day. And then they think that that's what it's about. And it's just gotten worse every year. So I don't know. I'm not sure how to proceed. In the past, that's what we've done, is we've done a subcommittee. I don't know if we need to do it, but I don't want to just kind of accept it as the status quo. So I don't know if we need to put something on the agenda or not. I probably shouldn't be talking about this stuff. I don't know. Do we need to put it on the agenda?
City manager.
Actually, have we as a council actually
Let's hear from the city manager.
dealt with it?
One option that I'm happy to at least go explore with fervor is to request Cal Poly come and provide a presentation, ideally in January, I think, just to give people an idea of what they've been planning. I know there have been a lot of discussions that we've had on a staff level, and as the mayor mentioned, our police chief has been, at least has started to get involved with a task force that the university has put together. But in terms of the discussion with the council and a reporting out in terms of what they've been thinking or what they're planning on doing, I can at least make the request. And with that idea of potentially in January, I think that might be a good time frame.
Thank you. I think that would be a good start, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
All right. Moving back to committee reports, Councilmember Francis.
Yes, thank you. So Nacimiento Water Project was supposed to be this coming Thursday, but has been canceled for the month due to no urgent action. So that's good news on that front. And this coming Thursday is also the CAPSLO board meeting. So nothing to report from either of those, but I did want to mention that last Friday I had the honor of getting to go out to Los Ranchos Elementary School and attend their blue ribbon ceremony. They were honored with the U.S. Department of Education award for academic excellence and closing their achievement gap, which is a huge deal, and just wanted to congratulate all the hard work of the students, teachers, and staff out there on that front. And also wanted to thank our Whale Rock staff for a really excellent tour. They took Councilmember Shoresman and I out and gave us the opportunity to really see behind the scenes up there, and incredible work that they're doing to get our water supply up and running. So it's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shoresman.
Yes, a great tour and a beautiful evening out at Whale Rock. A little cold, but we saw a lot of birds out there. It's actually really beautiful if you get a chance to go hike around the lake up there, the reservoir. Last Thursday, attended the Lower Higuera business visit that the chamber hosted for the business owners and property owners in the Lower Higuera area. It was a great opportunity to have some dialogue with the residents and business owners, and several of my colleagues, Councilmember Francis and Vice Mayor Pease and Councilmember Marks were all in attendance. So I think some good information exchange happening there. And then on Friday, I attended the REACH Regional Economic Development Forum that was held down at the Santa Maria Airport with lots of local business, regional, not just local, but regional business leaders and interested parties that are interested in enhancing our activities and growing more head of household and living wage and growing the pathways for those types of jobs along the Central Coast. And then on Sunday, attended, I'm wearing my little remembrance pin here because the World Day of Remembrance was hosted by SLOCOG and Bike Slow County and a number of other organizations out in front of the courthouse to remember the approximately 30 people a year in our county that die in traffic collisions and as passengers in cars, as pedestrians, and as cyclists on our roads. And it's a much bigger number than it should be. And we were all sort of renewing our support, I think, in a lot of ways for our Vision Zero plan that we heard we'll have a report on coming up very soon here by our staff person earlier in the meeting. So that's all that I think there's been time for since the last meeting. And we do have a full Homeless Services Oversight Council meeting tomorrow at 1 p.m. at Department of Social Services, and those are public meetings, so anybody is welcome to attend. That's it for me.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you. In addition to attending those, I had the opportunity to attend the monthly mayor's meeting that was hosted by Mayor Carla Wixom in Morro Bay. It was good to connect with the colleagues. It was mostly a year-end celebration, so it was a good meeting to go to. And I just wanted to update that Councilmember Francis and I continue to participate in the ad hoc committee about recycled water. We had another meeting on Monday. We'll probably have one more right after Thanksgiving break, and then the item will come before council at some point. And then finally, coming up on Sunday, the 24th, yes, this Sunday, on behalf of the mayor and the council, I'll be presenting a proclamation at the Interfaith Thanksgiving service. So that's the SLO Ministerial Association hosts that. It's at Congregation Beth David, open to everyone. It starts at, I think, 2:30-ish. 2:30 or 3, so encourage folks to attend. It's really a beautiful event of the community coming together.
Thank you, I agree. It's always fun. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. I have nothing to report for the Airport Land Use Commission. In terms of the Central Coast Community Energy, the meeting is coming up in the future, and that will be my last meeting as a policy board member. I believe the seat is being rotated to Morro Bay, and Carla Wixom, the mayor, will be the representative because we have a shared seat, and our city has had the policy board position, the lead position, for I think 5 years. So we are going to be switching that way, and also the operations board. Their city manager will be taking that position on the operations board, but hopefully our city will be able to provide some kind of technical support and expertise to Morro Bay, because they really are stepping into a whole new area that's pretty complex. So Air Pollution Control District, it was mostly just study sessions. There were no actual decisions being made. The executive director was out on medical leave. He'll be coming back soon. He's doing well. But we did, as part of our study session, look at the success of the clean air room project, which has to do with giving away or selling it at a deep discount air purifiers for people who live near polluted areas. And not just near the dunes, but also when there are ozone problems as well. So it's been dispersed throughout the county. And then we talked about the lawn electrification program, and I'm circulating the hard copy in case you want to actually see it with the little illustrations. Integrated Waste Management Authority, we did close escrow on our new headquarters. and there's a request for proposals going out to do a rate study. And that just has to do with the rates, not of the various jurisdictions. Like our city will be doing a rate study for our own jurisdiction in terms of our contract with the haulers. But this request for proposal is just about the waste management fee that the IWMA charges. And right now, we've been able to reduce it by 2%. It's down to 3.4%, and so we want to know if we can possibly reduce it any further. I don't know. We'll have to see. That does mean that sometime in December, the little building across the street will be going, will be up for sale. It's going to go on the MLS, so we'll see what happens there. I did want to mention just SCLC. I somehow have been unable to go to any of those meetings all year. I've missed every single one. And that's because I also represent the Investment Oversight Committee. I'm the representative for that. And for some reason, they've been meeting at exactly the same time. So in the future, they're not going to meet at the same time they're going to meet. That's been changed. The date has been changed. But it did make me question whether we want to stay with the present rotation. And I think this is something when we have the brown bag meeting, we can maybe talk about it. Or do we want to just say that the mayor and an appointed liaison and another city council member has that opportunity? I don't know if the rotation, it happens so infrequently, and then if you miss it, it's a long time. So would our city be better served if we just went ahead and assigned one person? I don't know. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you. Councilmember Schwarzman.
I think it would be a good thing to discuss at one of our brown bag meetings. I've had a similar experience. Have not been able to go to a meeting the meeting that I was assigned with, and had a conversation with the city clerk about that. So I think I can see the arguments on both sides. So I think it's maybe just worth having a discussion about.
The good news is on December 17th, we'll be having that discussion about all of the thank you, advisory committees and liaisons. Well, mine's very short. I want to first thank Councilmember Schwarzman, Vice Mayor Pease, for attending the REACH event and for the mayor event. Unfortunately, I was out with a family funeral, and so I couldn't make everything that I wanted to. But I did also enjoy a wonderful elementary experience. Hawthorne came here, and I have to say, Deputy City Manager Greg Herman is amazing. And City Manager Whitney McDonald, we got to come and experience the dotocracy that we all love for decades with the students. And I will tell you what, I'm sure you'll get to see a picture of them later, but the students also said at second grade, housing, homelessness, healthcare were their biggest issues. There was others, obviously, but of the top 5, they pretty much matched ours. So just when people think, little kids versus grownups, we're all dealing with the same issues. And then I was really excited to be invited to the AFP, which is something fundraising professionals. I can't remember. I used to be a fundraiser. You'd think I would know. But it was really fun to see Ziad Nakasha and Annika Scranton. They were both honored as Philanthropists of the Year into our community. They give back so much, and it was awesome. And lastly, just earlier today, I got to be on the governor's call for transforming behavioral health in California. We, of course, discussed Prop 101 and CARE Act, and what that's going to do potentially to get more grant funding and how it's going to be managed, and help people who are unhoused to not be unhoused as much as they are now. So hopefully that'll get passed on to HSOC. And my other thing is it goes back to the county a lot, and we want to always be good partners, but the money is going to the county, so we're going to have continue to work closely together. Well, that is what I have for today. I can't believe it's going to be a while till we see each other next. I hope you all have a wonderful couple of weeks, and we'll see each other on December 9th. December 9th for the swearing in of our Councilmember-elect, Mike Boswell, and the sad goodbye to Vice Mayor Pease. So look forward to your bonbons. Thank you and good night, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.